My hands were shaking as I read my son's message. Don't get married. Get out of there. We need to talk urgently. I was standing in my wedding dress just minutes away from walking down the aisle. My family's seats were empty. Not a single one of them had shown up. For a second, I thought it was some cruel mistake. Maybe traffic, maybe confusion. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. 15 years after losing my husband, I had finally dared to believe in love again. I thought I'd found safety, someone who saw me, who made me feel alive. Instead, I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, and the people I loved most were trying to stop me. That message changed everything. My name is Eleanor Harris. I'm 64 years old, and that morning I thought my life was about to start over. I was standing in St. Helena's Chapel, wearing an ivory wedding dress that made me feel both proud and nervous. After 15 years of being alone since my husband passed away, I was finally going to marry again. I had convinced myself that love could still find someone my age, that it wasn't too late to be happy. The organ played softly while people from David's side took their seats. I kept glancing at the rows marked reserved, Harris family. My son Ethan, his wife Melissa, and my 2 grandkids were supposed to sit there. I had even tied little ribbons on their chairs myself the night before. But now, those seats were empty. I kept waiting for the sound of the chapel doors opening, for their voices, but there was only silence. I smiled at the cameraman who was recording everything, mostly to hide how uncomfortable I felt. He told me to relax, that the light looked beautiful on me. I tried to believe him, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every minute that passed made me feel heavier, like something wasn't right, but I couldn't name it. I told myself they were late, maybe traffic, maybe the kids had a meltdown. There was always some reason, and I tried to hold on to that thought. David stood near the altar, talking with one of his friends. He looked calm, confident, completely unaware that my heart was racing. He waved at me once and smiled that easy smile he always had, the one that had made me forget my doubts more times than I could count. I smiled back, but it felt forced. I could already hear people whispering behind me. Someone said, "Where's her family?" And I wished I hadn't heard it. I checked my phone again. No missed calls, no texts. I called Ethan once, then again. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Melissa's number, same thing. I even tried calling Chloe, my granddaughter, though I knew she probably wouldn't answer in the middle of the day. Nothing. The silence felt strange, like the world was holding its breath. The wedding planner came over quietly and asked if I wanted to delay the ceremony. I told her no, maybe just wait a few more minutes. I was trying to sound calm, but my throat was tight and my chest felt heavy. Everyone was watching me, David's friends, the priest, even the kids serving at the church. I didn't want anyone to see how close I was to crying. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. A single vibration, one message. For a second I felt relieved, thinking maybe Ethan was on his way, but when I looked down, my whole body went still. The message said, "Don't get married, Mom. Get out of there. Please. Ethan." I stared at the words, reading them again and again. It didn't make sense. Why would he say that? Why would my own son tell me to walk away on the day he was supposed to give me away? My hands were cold and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I tried to breathe slowly, but it was useless. The cameraman was still there, filming, and I didn't want anyone to see what was happening on my screen. I slipped the phone behind my bouquet, pretending to adjust the flowers. My smile faded. I looked at the empty seats again. They were still waiting, untouched, ribbons perfectly tied. I turned my head toward the tall windows. It had started to rain outside. The glass was fogged, and I could barely see the street. Something was wrong. Deep down, I knew it. My son wasn't the kind of man to panic. If he sent that message, there had to be a reason. I looked back toward David, who was now talking to one of his guests, laughing like nothing in the world could go wrong. And for the first time since I met him, I didn't feel safe. I stood there, holding my bouquet, trying to decide what to do. Everyone was still waiting for me to walk down the aisle, but I couldn't move. My eyes stayed on that text message, those few words that made everything inside me shift. I didn't know it yet, but that message was about to change everything. Not just my wedding, but the way I saw the people around me, and the man I thought I knew. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "What's happening to my family?" Then I looked up toward the altar and saw David smiling at me again, and this time I didn't smile back. 18 months earlier, my life looked nothing like a romance story. I was 62, a retired pediatric nurse, and my days followed the same rhythm for years. Every Wednesday, I volunteered at Maplewood Hospital, reading stories to the children in the oncology ward. It gave me something to do, something that still felt useful. Most days after finishing there, I'd stop by the same grocery store, buy the same salad, and drive back to my quiet house. That was my life, and I had accepted it. That night, Maplewood Hospital was hosting a charity auction to raise money for new equipment. The nurses convinced me to come along and help. It wasn't really my kind of event, but I went anyway. I wore a navy blue dress that had been sitting in my closet for years. When I arrived, the room was full of people who looked richer and younger than me. I smiled, stayed near the silent auction table, and tried to blend in. That's when he walked in, David Langston. I remember it clearly because the atmosphere around him changed. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room. He took it over without trying. His voice carried when he greeted people, low and calm, like someone who always got what he wanted. He noticed me standing alone near a stack of children's books on the donation table and came right over. "You're Mrs. Harris, right? The one who reads to the kids every Wednesday?" he asked. I was a little surprised he knew. "Yes," I said, trying not to sound nervous. "How did you know that?" He smiled, easy and warm. "I asked around. Everyone here seems to know you. They say you have a way of making those kids forget they're sick for a while. That's a rare thing." It had been years since anyone said something that kind to me. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and thanked him. He introduced himself, David Langston, retired financial consultant living between Maplewood and Savannah. He said he had lost his wife, Catherine, to breast cancer 8 years ago. His tone changed when he said her name. It wasn't dramatic, just soft, a little sad. Something in that moment pulled me in. I understood that kind of loss, the kind that leaves you half here, half somewhere else. We ended up talking for a long time. About work, about how quiet the house feels after your children move away, about how strange it is when people stop asking about your life once you turn 60. He said something that stayed with me. Older people don't disappear, but the world acts like we do. That hit me in a way I didn't expect. Because it was true. I had spent years being Mom, Grandma, or Nurse Harris. I couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at me like a woman, not just a role. As the night went on, David stayed close. He bid on a weekend trip to Napa just because I was interested in it. We didn't win, but it didn't matter. The way he laughed, the way he listened, I felt noticed. It had been a long time since anyone listened to me like that. When the event ended, he offered to walk me to my car. In the parking lot, under the dim streetlights, he told me, "You know, Eleanor, people should see you. You deserve that. You deserve to be seen again." The way he said it wasn't flirtatious. It was quiet, gentle, almost like he understood what I'd been missing all these years. I had been invisible for so long that just hearing those words made something inside me come alive again. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he smiled, the way he seemed to know exactly what to say. He called the next morning just to ask if I'd made it home safely, and before hanging up, he said, "Let me take you to dinner sometime. No pressure, just two people who understand life a little better than most." I said yes, of course I did. At dinner, he asked about my nursing career, about my late husband, James. He told me I reminded him of his wife, kind, grounded, strong. It sounded flattering, maybe too flattering, but I brushed that thought aside. The conversation flowed so naturally that it was easy to forget we'd just met. He ordered a bottle of wine, spoke to the waiter in what he said was Italian, and made me feel like I was part of something bigger than my small, predictable life. That was the start of it, the beginning of a story I thought would bring me peace. Looking back now, I see it differently. I see how perfectly timed his entrance was, how flawless his words seemed, how practiced his charm felt. But that night, I didn't see any of it. I just saw kindness. I saw someone who made me feel alive again after 15 years of silence. And I remember thinking as I got into bed that evening, maybe it's finally my turn to be happy. If only I'd known that sometimes, when something feels too perfect, it's not a blessing. It's a warning I didn't recognize. For the first time in years, my days started to feel exciting again. David called every morning just to say good morning and every night to say good night. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in his world. When he talked, he always sounded calm and certain, like nothing ever went wrong in his life. He told me stories about his business travels, about the places he wanted to take me someday, about how he'd always believed love could happen twice in a lifetime, and I wanted so badly to believe him. Our first date was at Bolano's Trattoria, a small Italian restaurant in downtown Maplewood. I had passed by that place for years but never gone in. It was too fancy, too loud for someone who'd grown used to quiet dinners alone. But that night, everything felt different. He ordered wine like a man who understood it, spoke a few words in Italian to the waiter, and laughed easily like he had known me forever. "You have beautiful hands," he said once while I was talking about my work at the hospital. "They look like they've helped a lot of people." It was such a simple thing to say, but no one had said anything like that to me in years. I could feel my face warming as I smiled. After that, our dates became more frequent. One weekend, he picked me up in a silver Porsche, said it was his weekend car. The next time, it was something else, a black SUV, then a convertible. He explained that he liked cars, that he collected them for fun. I didn't question it. Why would I? Everything about him seemed effortless. We went to a symphony in the city once, and during intermission, he bought champagne and said, "I love watching you enjoy things. You light up when you hear music." And he was right. I did. Around him, I felt alive again. I felt younger, lighter, like maybe the years I had spent alone hadn't been a waste after all. One afternoon, I met my friend Linda for coffee. She had known me since high school, and she was one of the few people I could talk to honestly. I told her about David, how charming he was, how thoughtful. She listened quietly, her eyebrows slowly lifting the longer I talked. "Eleanor," she said finally, "good men don't move that fast." I laughed. "You think I'm moving too fast?" "I think he is," she said. "You met him, what, a few weeks ago? And he's already talking about your future together?" I tried to shrug it off, but her words stuck with me. Linda had always been protective, sometimes too much. She went on to tell me about someone she knew, a woman from her church, who had been swept off her feet by a man she met at a charity gala. He told her all the right things, made her feel safe, and then vanished after borrowing money for what he called a business emergency. Linda said, "He pretended to be a widower, too. It's always the same story. A man who knows how to sound broken just enough." I remember smiling, politely, but my stomach felt uneasy. "You're watching too many crime shows," I joked, but she didn't laugh. When I got home that night, David called. He asked how my day went, if I'd had dinner, if I missed him. I didn't tell him about my conversation with Linda. I didn't want to sound paranoid. Besides, the sound of his voice calmed me. He always knew how to make my doubts fade. A few days later, he surprised me by taking me to a lake house outside town. It was quiet and beautiful, the kind of place that felt private, safe. He told me it was one of his vacation homes. We sat by the fireplace drinking wine, and I remember feeling a strange kind of peace. I told him how lonely it had been after James died, how I had convinced myself that being alone was easier. He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "You deserve to be someone's reason again." That sentence hit me hard. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, like he really meant it. I didn't realize how much I had needed to hear those words until then. Over the next few months, David became part of my routine. He called when I didn't expect it, brought flowers for no reason, remembered small things I had mentioned in passing. It felt too perfect, but I told myself I had earned this. After everything life had taken from me, maybe it was finally giving something back. One evening, after dinner at Bolano's again, he handed me a small box wrapped in white paper. I laughed, telling him he didn't need to buy me anything. He just smiled and said, "It's not about needing. It's about wanting to." Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small crystal pendant that shimmered under the restaurant lights. "For the woman who still believes in forever," he said. I didn't know what to say. I felt tears welling up, and he reached across the table, brushing my hand gently. That night, when I got home, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, touching the necklace. The stone sparkled beautifully, catching every bit of light. I should have felt joy, but there was something else, something colder beneath it. Maybe it was Linda's voice echoing in the back of my mind. Good men don't move that fast. Or maybe it was just a quiet instinct I refused to listen to. All I know is, as the light caught that crystal, it looked both beautiful and cold, just like hope when it's about to turn dangerous. A few months into our relationship, David suggested we have dinner with my family. "It's time I meet the people who raised such a remarkable woman," he said. His voice was warm and persuasive, as always. I hesitated at first. Ethan could be cautious to the point of suspicion, and Melissa had a way of seeing through people that sometimes made them uncomfortable, but I agreed. If David and I were truly building something real, my family would have to meet him eventually. We made a reservation at the Maplewood Country Club, a place David claimed he was a member of. The dining room was beautiful, soft lighting, white tablecloths, quiet piano music in the background. I had never eaten there before. It felt expensive, but David told me not to worry. I want to do this properly, he said. When we arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting with Melissa and the kids. Ethan stood up, shook David's hand firmly, and gave him that polite but careful look that only accountants seem to have, the one that reads people like numbers. Dinner started off well enough. David talked easily, telling stories about his retirement, about traveling between Oregon and Georgia, about how he missed the days of old-fashioned business deals sealed with a handshake. Melissa listened kindly, asking about his work and how he spent his time. Ethan didn't say much, just nodded occasionally, eyes fixed on David like he was solving a puzzle. When the waiter brought the bill, David reached into his wallet and pulled out a stack of cash. I noticed Ethan's eyes flick toward it. David counted the bills neatly and handed them over. The waiter thanked him and left. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression calm but tight. "They don't usually take cash here," he said. David smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Cash is freedom," he said smoothly. "You don't have to wait for the bank to tell you what you can spend." Ethan's reply came with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "In my line of work, cash is also what hides fraud." For a moment, the air at the table changed. David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he laughed it off. "Ah," spoken like a true accountant, always suspicious of anything that doesn't come with a paper trail. Melissa quickly jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. "Ethan's just teasing," she said with a soft laugh, but her eyes darted between the two men, sensing something unspoken. The rest of the dinner carried on politely, but something had shifted. I could feel the tension sitting between them, invisible but heavy. David kept his tone even, charming as always, but I caught glimpses of something sharper underneath, the way his eyes flickered when Ethan asked about his supposed properties, the way he deflected questions with vague answers that sounded impressive but said nothing. At one point, Ethan asked, "You said you have a place in Savannah, right? What neighborhood?" "Pelican Point," David answered quickly, smiling. "Right by the water. Beautiful sunsets there." Ethan nodded, his expression neutral. "My firm has a client from that area. I hear property values there are through the roof. You must have gotten in early." 5 years ago, David said smoothly. "Got lucky with the timing." But I noticed Ethan's fingers tapping lightly against his wine glass, a small tell I knew well. It meant he was thinking, calculating, noticing something that didn't fit. When dessert came, the conversation drifted toward lighter topics. The kids' school, travel, the weather, but Ethan stayed quiet. David tried to draw him in, asking about his accounting practice, joking about how hard it must be to trust anyone with numbers these days. Ethan just smiled faintly and said, "That's why I prefer facts to stories." After dinner, David offered to cover valet for everyone. He pressed a $100 bill into the attendant's hand before I could even reach for my purse. Ethan thanked him but said they'd take their own car home. Once they were gone, David slipped his arm around my shoulder. "Well," he said, "that went well, don't you think?" I nodded, trying to convince myself it had. But the drive home was quiet. He hummed softly to the radio, completely at ease, while my thoughts were a mess. I kept replaying that small exchange about cash, the look in Ethan's eyes, the way David's smile had stiffened just for a second. Later that night, Ethan called. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Mom," he said, "can we talk about David?" I sighed, already defensive. "Ethan, please don't start. You barely know him." He didn't raise his voice. "That's the problem. I don't know him. He talks like someone reading from a script. It's too polished. Everything about him feels rehearsed." I tried to laugh, to dismiss it. "He's just confident, that's all. You were young once, too." Ethan paused for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost tired. "Yeah, I was. And that's exactly why I know when someone's trying too hard to be perfect." After we hung up, I sat in bed for a long time, staring at the necklace David had given me. The house was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. I told myself Ethan was just being protective, that he'd come around once he saw how happy I was. Still, a small part of me, when I tried hard to ignore, couldn't forget the look in David's eyes when Ethan said the word fraud. And for the first time, my heart felt a little less certain. Thanksgiving that year was supposed to be special. David insisted on hosting it at my house, said he wanted to do something nice for the family. I didn't argue. It had been years since the house felt full, and I wanted that again. Laughter, food, and the feeling that we were all together. He arrived early that morning with boxes of groceries, fine wine, and 2 catering staff he said were a little surprise. The dining table looked like something out of a magazine. Gold-trimmed plates, linen napkins, flowers everywhere. I remember feeling both proud and uneasy. David was good at making things look perfect, maybe too good. When Ethan and Melissa walked in, they were polite but cautious. Melissa complimented the setup, but Ethan stayed quiet, just gave me a kiss on the cheek and said, "This looks expensive." "It's Thanksgiving," David said easily, walking over with a wide smile. "Let's celebrate properly. Life's too short to count pennies." Dinner started out fine. The kids laughed, the food was excellent, and David kept the conversation lively, asking about school, work, and even offering to help Ethan with some investment opportunities. I could tell Ethan didn't like that. He nodded politely, but his tone was clipped. After dessert, David stood and said, "I have something for everyone." He walked to the living room and came back carrying a pile of neatly wrapped boxes. Inside were gifts, expensive ones. A designer handbag for Melissa, a brand new tablet for Chloe, high-end headphones for Lucas, and a set of golf clubs for Ethan that looked like they cost a small fortune. "David, you shouldn't have," I said, though part of me was touched. "Nonsense," he replied. "You're my family now. I want you to have nice things." Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "These are very nice," he said quietly, glancing at one of the receipts that had slipped out of a bag. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything else. The kids were excited at first, but Melissa's face had changed. I saw her watching him closely, the way she did when she sensed something was off. Later that night, while the adults cleaned up, Chloe went upstairs to play music on her new tablet. She told us later what she overheard. A phone call from the hallway, David's voice low but clear. "Yes, it's Daniel," he said. "Don't call me this number again." Chloe froze, thinking maybe she misheard. But when she peeked around the corner, she saw him holding a phone she'd never seen before. Small, black, not the one he used at dinner. He slipped it into his jacket pocket and walked back toward the kitchen like nothing had happened. Chloe didn't say anything that night. She waited until she and her parents were in the car going home. "Mom," she said quietly, "why would David tell someone his name is Daniel?" Melissa frowned. "Daniel? Are you sure that's what you heard?" Chloe nodded. "He said it twice." Ethan looked straight ahead, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Melissa glanced at him, lowering her voice. "If we tell your grandmother, she won't believe us." He exhaled slowly. "Then we find out ourselves." Back at my house, David and I were slow dancing in the living room. He'd put on a jazz record, turned the lights low, and poured another glass of wine. For a moment, I let myself enjoy it, the warmth, the music, the feeling of being wanted again. He held me close and whispered, "You looked beautiful tonight." I smiled. "Ethan doesn't trust you," I said softly, half expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, his expression changed. Just a flicker, gone as quickly as it came. Then he smiled again. "Because he doesn't know what a real man looks like." I laughed, though it came out thinner than I meant it to. He brushed his fingers through my hair, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't worry about him. He'll come around once he sees how happy you are." I nodded, but something inside me shifted. His tone had been too sharp, too certain, like a man used to winning arguments, not earning trust. When he stepped away to refill our glasses, I caught my reflection in the living room window. The lights from the Christmas tree flickered behind me, the glass reflecting both of us. But something about the image looked wrong, like the surface had tiny cracks that no one else could see, just enough to make the picture slightly distorted. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was tired, that Ethan's words were getting into my head. Still, when David came back and put his arm around me again, the warmth I used to feel wasn't there. I smiled to hide it, resting my head on his shoulder, but deep down, the chill had already settled. And no matter how tightly he held me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was breaking. Quietly, invisibly, right beneath the surface. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur. David took charge of everything, the venue, the guest list, the music, even the flowers. He told me it was his way of taking the stress off my shoulders, that I had done enough in life taking care of everyone else. It sounded sweet, and for a while I believed him. But slowly, I realized I didn't know much about what was happening. When I asked about the menu, he said, "You'll love it, don't worry." When I asked who was invited, he smiled and said, "Just close friends and family. I want it intimate." But I never saw a single RSVP or contract or receipt. He handled it all. Or so he said. Every time I offered to help, he brushed me off with a kiss and a line like, "Let me handle it, darling. You just focus on being the beautiful bride you deserve to be." At first, it felt romantic. Later, it started to feel like I was being gently pushed aside for my own wedding. About a week before the ceremony, Ethan came by. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much. He hugged me, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else. "Mom," he said, finally sitting at the kitchen table, "have you seen any actual documents for this wedding?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean anything. A venue contract, bank statements, tax records, proof of his income, anything that shows who this man really is." I sighed, already frustrated. "Ethan, not this again." He leaned forward, his tone steady but firm. "Mom, I'm serious. You're about to marry someone you've known less than a year. You don't know where his money comes from. You don't know what he does all day. You don't even know who his friends are." I could feel my temper rising. "You think I'm stupid?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "No, I think you're lonely." The silence after that hit harder than the words themselves. It felt like he'd slapped me, even though I knew he hadn't meant it cruelly. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that this wasn't about loneliness, it was about love. But the truth sat too close to his words. I stood up and walked to the sink, trying to keep my voice steady. "You think I can't tell the difference between a good man and a bad one?" He exhaled sharply. "I think you want to believe this one so badly that you're not even looking." I turned around, tears stinging my eyes. "You have no idea what it's like to wake up every day to silence, to eat alone, to feel like everyone else's life kept going except yours." Ethan didn't answer. He just stood there, his face softening, but he didn't apologize. Instead, he said quietly, "I just don't want to see you hurt again, Mom." When he left, I sat at the table for a long time. The house felt too still. Outside, the sky was gray, and for a moment I caught myself staring at the clouds, wishing I could ask James what he would think of all this. That night, David called. His voice was cheerful, excited. "Big day coming up, sweetheart. I can't wait to see you walking down that aisle." I didn't tell him about the argument. I didn't tell him how unsure I suddenly felt. I told him I loved him, and he said, "I love you too. Everything's going to be perfect." But even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the sound of Ethan's voice. "You're lonely?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom surrounded by half-packed boxes, the white dress hanging on the closet door. I looked at the picture of James on my nightstand, the same one I'd kept for 15 years. He was smiling, standing next to me in the garden we used to tend together. I held the frame in both hands and whispered, "If you're watching, tell me if I'm doing the right thing." The room was quiet. No answer came, of course. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the rain starting to fall against the window. I went to bed eventually, telling myself that doubts were normal. Every bride gets nervous, every family worries. That's all this was. But when I woke up the next morning, the world outside was covered in fog. The kind that makes everything look softer but colder too. I looked out the window, and the sky was a dull silver, heavy with rain. I told myself it was just weather. But deep down, I knew. It was a sign. The day I thought would be the start of a new life began gray, cold, and empty. And by the time the ceremony started, my family's seats would still be waiting for them, untouched. Ethan's message hit me like a physical blow, because it was short and sure and came from him. Not from worry or drama, but from a place I trusted. The words were still on my screen when I stood up and walked out of the chapel, not thinking about cameras, guests, or decor, only feeling the dress sticking to my legs from the damp air and the ground sucking at my shoes as I hurried down the path. The rain had started in earnest by then, and when I stepped onto the sidewalk, my veil picked up mud from the pavement, dark streaks down the hem I couldn't wash off right away. I remember the cold settling into my bones as I ran toward my son's car, the sound of my heels lost under the rain. When I reached Ethan's house, I felt ridiculous for how wet and out of place I looked, but the sight of my family waiting there, Ethan, Melissa, Chloe, Lucas, made the world narrow to a small, bright focus. They were gathered in the living room like they'd been holding their breath all morning, and the relief that flooded me to see them was immediate, until Ethan held up a manila folder and I noticed how steady his hands were. He didn't look angry, just exhausted, the way someone looks when they've been doing the work no one asked to do but everyone needed. He set the folder on the coffee table and tapped it once. "We need you to see this," he said. Melissa sat beside him with her face white and tired, Chloe close to her, holding the new tablet David had given her as if it were evidence. Ethan opened the folder and pulled out photographs, copies of documents, police reports, and printouts from a private investigator. They had been at this for months, piecing things together quietly so I wouldn't worry, and now it all lay in front of me like a map of a person I thought I knew. The name on some of the reports leapt off the page. Daniel Reeves. The photographs showed the man I knew as David Langston, the same smile, the same posture. There were police reports from other states, statements from other women, notes from a PI who had tracked purchases and short-term rental history, bank transfers that led to accounts that disappeared. My hands went cold as I flipped through the pages, seeing evidence that read like a pattern. A man who found widows, learned their routines, gained trust, and then worked to move their money. Melissa couldn't hold it together. She put her head in her hands, and when she looked up, she said in a small voice, "He even knew your insurance amount." That line cut deeper than anything else because I had mentioned James's policy in passing once to a friend and never thought twice about it. And yet here was proof someone hadn't just listened, but had used that information as a tool. I felt the ring on my finger like an insult, and I pulled it off and threw it down hard onto the table, so it bounced and caught the light and hit the wood with a sound I remember as if it broke something in the room. "How long have you known?" I demanded, and my voice sounded strange to me, louder than I wanted it to be. Ethan said, 3 months. His voice was flat, precise, and it made my stomach fold over itself. 3 months of watching him, following his leads, finding document trails, and keeping it from me because they thought it would be easier to catch him than to ruin my hopes too soon. I could have fallen apart then, could have asked why they had kept this from me, could have screamed about trust and how my life was my own. Instead, I looked at them all, at the tired lines around Ethan's eyes, at Melissa's wet cheeks, at Chloe's small fists clenched on her knees, and something in me changed. My first sharp feeling of hurt softened into something else that felt like a clean, bright anger, not the bitter kind that eats quietly, but the steady kind that demands action. I picked the ring up off the table and held it for a moment, then set it down again and met Ethan's eyes. "Then let me be the one who ends him," I said, meaning every word, not reckless but decided, because I realized in that moment that I would not be the final page in someone else's pattern. I would not be the woman who got quiet and walked away with nothing. I would be the woman who made sure it stopped. Ethan handed me the folder again later that night. "You should see all of it," he said. His voice was careful, like he was handing me something sharp that might still cut. When they left me alone, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. For a long time, I just looked at the papers without touching them. I wanted to close it to pretend I hadn't seen that name. Daniel Reeves, printed across the top. But I couldn't. So I read. The first report was about a woman named Dorothy Chen, 68, widowed, retired teacher. The note said she met Daniel at a senior book club. He said he was a philanthropist helping fund educational programs. There was a photo of them at a small restaurant, her smiling, him looking at her with the same warm eyes I thought had been meant only for me. The next page was colder. Victim lost $312,000 in savings and her home. There was a police report clipped behind it, handwritten notes from an investigator. Subject convinced victim to invest in real estate project. All accounts transferred to offshore holdings. Subject disappeared within 2 weeks of wedding date. I heard her voice in my head as I read the report, quiet, defeated. He said he wanted to take care of me. He said I wouldn't have to worry again. The second name was Sarah Martinez, 72, former nurse, widowed 20 years. She met him through a grief counseling group. Her file was shorter, but the words hit harder. There was a note scribbled in blue ink. Victim attempted suicide after discovering subject's identity. There was a photo of her house, small, empty, the word foreclosure on the front door. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of that. For a second, I could hear her too. A voice that sounded like my own. He made me feel seen again. The third file was Linda Thompson, 65. Heart failure 6 months after losing everything. Her sister had filed the report, claiming Daniel had taken every cent from her sister's pension. The photo was of Linda and Daniel at a lake, the same pose, the same hand placement on the shoulder, the same smile he gave me in our photos. I stared at those pictures until my hands shook. The pattern was the same. The timing, the charm, even the choice of words. Hope. Forever. Second chances. He'd said them to all of us. For a moment, fear filled me, not just for myself, but for the women who had believed him before me. I could see their faces now, the trust in their smiles. Then fear changed to something stronger, something cleaner. Anger. Not the kind that burns fast and fades, but the kind that roots itself deep and doesn't go away. He had studied women like us, the widowed, the quiet, the grateful ones. He'd made us believe that love could still happen, then used that belief to strip away what was left of our dignity. I got up and walked to the cabinet where I had kept the wedding photo, the one from the engagement shoot, the one I hadn't framed yet. In it, he was holding my hand, smiling down at me while I looked up, unaware of what was coming. I took a pair of scissors from the drawer and started cutting down the middle. His smile disappeared first, then the rest of him, until I was left with half a photo, just me, standing there in a white dress. I held it over the kitchen sink and lit a match. The paper curled and blackened, the flame eating through his half of the picture. "I won't be your next obituary," I whispered. The smell of smoke filled the kitchen. I watched it rise and vanish, and something inside me felt lighter, like the air had shifted. When Ethan came back into the room, he looked startled to see the sink full of ash. "Mom, we need to go to the police. He's dangerous. He's done this before. He'll try to disappear again." I shook my head slowly. "Not yet." "Mom," I cut him off. "He taught me how he works. He taught me the rules. Now I'll play better." He stared at me for a long time, unsure if he should argue or let me speak. I think he saw something in my face that made him stop. I wasn't scared anymore. That night, I gathered everything from the folder and organized it myself. Dates, details, patterns. I highlighted the months, the timing of the proposals, the average amount each woman had lost. I marked his travel routes, the cities he preferred, the social events where he found them. He had a pattern, and patterns can be used to trap the person who made them. As I worked, I could almost hear the women's voices around me, not as ghosts, but as a chorus of witnesses. "You're not alone. He fooled all of us. Make it stop." It wasn't fear that kept me up that night. It was focus. For the first time in months, I felt awake. When I finally went to bed, the house was silent again, but I didn't feel small in that silence anymore. I walked past the mirror in the hallway and caught my reflection. My hair was messy, my eyes tired, but I didn't look like the woman who had stood at the altar waiting for a family that never came. That woman had been lost. This one wasn't. I stopped for a second, staring at the reflection, realizing something. The woman in the mirror didn't look broken or ashamed. She looked ready to end it, ready to fight back. The woman in the mirror wasn't a victim anymore. The next morning, Ethan called the police. Within a few hours, a detective named Angela Cortez came to the house. She looked to be in her 40s, sharp, composed, but with the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She introduced herself calmly, then looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mrs. Harris, I've been working cases like this for years. I'm sorry to tell you, you're not the first. But if you're willing, you can be the last." Something in her tone, the lack of pity, the quiet confidence, made me trust her. We sat at the dining table where the burnt ashes of the photograph still rested in the sink nearby. She spread out her case files, my folder, and her own notes. Her handwriting was tight and neat. "Daniel Reeves has been on our radar for a long time," she said. "He's careful. He doesn't take cash directly. He uses emotional manipulation to gain access, gets joint accounts or investments started under the victim's name, then drains them. By the time we have proof, he's gone." I nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" Angela's gaze held mine. "We set him up to expose himself." Ethan frowned. "You mean bait him?" "He's dangerous." Angela didn't look away from me. "We won't let her be alone. We'll monitor everything, audio, visual, location. But yes, he needs to believe the relationship is salvageable. If he thinks she's still in love, he'll try to finish what he started." I didn't hesitate. "Then I'll do it." Ethan turned toward me. "Mom, absolutely not." "I'm not asking for permission," I said quietly. "He took enough from other women. I won't let him take one more thing, not even control of how this ends." Angela leaned forward. "We'll make it safe. You'll wear a microphone, hidden in jewelry, something he won't suspect. He'll want to meet you, to convince you it was all a misunderstanding. That's when he'll start asking for access again. I nodded. Then that's when we get him. The following day, we started preparing. Angela showed up with 2 tech officers and a small suitcase full of equipment. She had me sit at the kitchen table as they explained everything. "This is a micro recorder," she said, placing a pearl earring on the table. "The battery lasts up to 3 hours. If you touch it twice, it sends a distress signal." She handed me a delicate necklace with a small charm. "Press here once if you feel unsafe. We'll come in." Her tone was calm, professional, but there was something maternal in her eyes as she watched me practice. "Try saying his name," she instructed. "David," I said, forcing my voice steady. She shook her head. "You said it too sharply. He's used to you sounding soft, trusting. You need to make him believe he still has control." I tried again, quieter this time. "David?" "Good," she said. "Now when he asks why, your family interfered. Keep your story simple. Tell him you're hurt, but you still love him. Men like him don't respond to anger. They respond to vulnerability. Let him think you're forgiving. That's when he'll get confident. That's when he'll slip." For hours we rehearsed. Angela had me run through every possible question he might ask. Where we'd go, what I'd bring, whether I trusted him. She stopped me when my breathing got too fast. "Slow down," she said softly. "You can't show fear. You've seen fear before. You were a nurse. Remember how you spoke to children in pain? Calm, steady, gentle. That's the tone you use." It surprised me how quickly I fell back into that rhythm. It wasn't acting. It was survival. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Chloe slipped a small folded note under my door. The handwriting was uneven, the kind of loops and curls that only a child could make. I opened it and read, "You don't need to prove you're strong, Grandma. Just come back." I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the paper for a long time. The words blurred as I blinked away tears. It hit me then that this wasn't just about justice. It was about coming home, about not letting him take away one more piece of who I was. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my purse behind my wallet. I didn't want to leave it behind. I needed to carry those words with me, a reminder of what mattered most. 2 days later, we were ready. Angela helped me record a message for David, soft, hesitant, emotional. I said the words slowly, like someone trying to rebuild a broken bridge. "David, I don't know what to think anymore. Everyone's against you, but my heart won't stop believing what we had was real. I can't end it like this." Angela nodded approvingly. "Good. That will work." The next morning he responded. The text came around 9. "I've missed you, sweetheart. Let's talk. Dinner tomorrow. Just us." Angela looked at me when I showed her the message. "He took the bait," she said quietly. Ethan wanted to protest again, but I could see in his face that he knew I wouldn't back down. He hugged me tight instead, his voice breaking when he said, "Please, Mom, just promise me you'll walk away if it feels wrong." I nodded, even though we both knew I couldn't promise that. Angela came to pick me up early the next evening. She helped me clip the earring in place, checked the microphone, and looked me in the eyes one last time. "Remember," she said, "you control the pace. He'll think he's leading the conversation, but you decide when it ends." I took a deep breath. "Understood." As we got ready to leave, Angela's phone buzzed, her team confirming their positions around the restaurant. She turned to me and asked, "Are you ready to face the devil?" I looked at her, steady and calm. "I've been married to his shadow for too long," I said. "It's time I met the man himself." She gave a short nod, and we walked toward the door together. 2 women from different worlds, bound by the same quiet understanding, the difference between fear and resolve. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds again, just like that wedding day, but this time I didn't see it as a bad sign. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder that storms clear the air before light comes through. I held my purse close, feeling the faint outline of Chloe's note inside, and for the first time in months, my heart was steady. Whatever waited for me next, I was ready. The Birchwood Grill was one of those places that tried to look casual but charged enough to keep most people out. I hadn't been there since before James died. It felt strange walking in, dressed in the blue dress David once said made me look like calm water. My hands were steady when I pushed open the door, but my heart wasn't. I spotted him immediately. He was sitting at a corner table near the window, back to the wall, the position of someone who liked control. When he saw me, His smile was perfect, warm, familiar, the kind of smile that used to make me forget myself. "Eleanor," he said, standing up to pull out my chair, "you look beautiful." I forced a soft laugh and said, "Thank you." My voice trembled slightly, and for once the tremor wasn't entirely acting. He leaned in as we sat down. "I've missed you," he said, his tone careful but affectionate. "These past few days have been hell. I still don't understand what happened. Why your family did that to us." I looked down, pretending to struggle with words. "They think they're protecting me," I said, keeping my tone shaky, vulnerable. "They don't understand you like I do." He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "No, they don't. But that's what families do. They get scared when they see something they don't understand. We can fix this. You and me." I smiled faintly, keeping my eyes lowered. "How?" He exhaled, pretending to think. Then, with the same confidence he had always carried, he said, "Let's leave, Eleanor. Let's get out of here. Just the two of us. We don't need them. We can go somewhere far away. Paris, maybe. Start fresh." His eyes were soft, but underneath there was calculation. I could feel it. "Paris?" I repeated, playing my part. "That sounds impossible." He smiled. "Nothing's impossible when it's real. I'll handle everything. The tickets, the hotel, the ceremony. You've done enough. It's my turn to take care of you." I hesitated, twisting my hands together as if unsure. "I don't want you to pay for everything," I said slowly. "Maybe I can move some money from my savings just to help with expenses." His expression changed, just a flicker, barely noticeable. The polite mask softened into something greedier, hungrier. He leaned closer, voice low and reassuring. "That's sweet of you, darling, but you don't have to. If it makes you feel better, though, we can transfer a little, just so you feel involved. It'll make things smoother." He said it like he was doing me a favor. My stomach turned. Outside, in a car parked across the street, Ethan sat with Detective Cortez, both wearing headsets. The audio feed from my earring was clear. Every time David's voice dropped lower, Ethan's hand clenched tighter around the armrest. Angela kept her eyes on the restaurant. "Wait for the transfer," she whispered into her mic. "We need him to ask for access, that's the line." Inside, the waiter brought wine. David lifted his glass. "To us," he said. I mirrored him. "To us." We clinked glasses. The sound was too loud, too sharp in my ears. He took a sip, then set the glass down and studied me. "You look tense," he said, smiling. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'll take care of everything." I forced a smile. "I'm not afraid." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Aren't you? You're quieter than usual." I shrugged, looking at the tablecloth. "It's just been a lot. My son, he's angry. He thinks you're—" I hesitated deliberately. "He thinks I'm what?" I let my voice break just enough. "That you're not who you say you are." He laughed then, not loudly, but enough to send a chill through me. "Families," he said, shaking his head. "They see shadows where there aren't any. They'd rather destroy something good than admit they're wrong." He reached across the table again, brushing his fingers against mine. "We can be happy, Eleanor. We don't need their approval. Let's go. Tomorrow. We'll fly to Paris. All I need is for you to give me access to book the tickets. I'll make it perfect." I nodded slowly. "Maybe. I can move some funds tonight, just to make sure everything's covered." He smiled, his eyes bright with triumph. "That's my girl." Across the street, Ethan exhaled through clenched teeth. "He's doing it," he whispered. Angela kept her tone even. "Not yet. Let her finish." Inside, David leaned back, looking satisfied. "I knew you'd come around," he said. "We're going to have a beautiful life. You'll see." I picked up my wine again, hands steady this time. "I hope so," I said softly. He smiled wider. "Trust me." For a second, I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because of how perfectly he played the part. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the performance for what it was. Every smile, every pause, every word had been rehearsed, maybe 100 times before me. He wasn't nervous because this wasn't new to him. It was routine, and I was about to break it. He reached for my hand again. I let him. You know I love you, right? He said. I smiled faintly. Of course, I whispered. Then I touched my necklace, the small charm that held the microphone. It was the signal. Outside, Angela's voice came through Ethan's earpiece, calm but firm. Move in, now. Inside the restaurant, I looked into David's eyes one last time. You always said love was about trust, I said. He smiled, not realizing yet that everything he trusted was about to fall apart. I let go of his hand and straightened my back. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into silence. My heart was calm now. The game was over. For a few moments after I touched the necklace, nothing happened. The restaurant sounded the same, clinking silverware, low voices, the faint hum of a jazz song from the speakers. David still sat across from me, smiling. But something in his eyes had changed. It was subtle, like a curtain being pulled back. The warmth was gone. He leaned forward slightly and said quietly, "Tell your son to stop pretending to sip his drink at the bar." My breath caught. I didn't turn my head, didn't dare look. I don't know what you mean, I said, forcing my voice steady. David's smile widened, but it was no longer charming, it was sharp. Come on, Eleanor, you almost made me believe you loved me. He said it softly, almost fondly, and that made it worse. He took a slow sip of wine, then set the glass down carefully. You really thought you could outsmart me, didn't you? Sweet, loyal Eleanor. You almost played the part better than I did. I clasped my hands together on the table, trying to appear calm even as my pulse hammered in my throat. You've been lying to me since the day we met, I said quietly. He chuckled, low and amused. Of course I have. That's the point. Everyone lies. You just lie less convincingly. Across the street, Angela's team was on alert, but her voice in the earpiece stayed quiet. Stay calm, she whispered. Let him talk. David leaned closer, lowering his voice. Do you have any idea how many times I've done this? 7. 7 perfect runs. You know what that adds up to? About $4.2 million. He smiled as he said it, like a man bragging about a successful career. And every time they said the same thing, I thought he loved me. You'd think after the 3rd or 4th they'd learn? My hands tightened in my lap. You destroy people, I said. He shrugged. I give them what they want, a story. Everyone wants to be seen, to be wanted. I just happen to know the cost. He leaned back, taking another sip of wine. You know what I call women like you? Emotional investors. You pour your hearts in, hoping for returns. But love, Eleanor, isn't a charity. It's a transaction, and I've always made a profit. Something inside me snapped then, not with rage, but with clarity. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had made me believe I could be loved again. The man who had studied my grief and used it like a blueprint. Then I guess I'm your bankruptcy, I said. His smile faltered for the first time. What did you say? I sat back, meeting his eyes steadily. You picked the wrong woman this time, David. You've been taking from others for years, but tonight, you lose everything. For a second, the mask slipped. His jaw clenched, and I saw the flicker of panic. Small, but real. Then he laughed again, forced and loud enough to draw attention. You think you've trapped me? Please. You have no idea how deep I've buried the money. I don't care about the money, I said. I care that you never do this to another woman again. That was when the front door of the restaurant opened. 2 men in plain clothes stepped in first, followed by Angela Cortez. She moved quietly but with purpose, her eyes locked on me for half a second. A silent confirmation that it was time. David noticed too late. Angela's voice was calm but firm. David Langston, also known as Daniel Reeves, you're under arrest for fraud, theft by deception, and elder abuse. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood. You can't prove? But before he could finish, one of the officers had his arm twisted behind his back. The other cuffed him with practiced ease. He didn't fight, he just stared at me. That same cold smile returned, thinner this time. You think this changes anything? He said. You can't bring back what's lost. I stood too, slowly, keeping my voice even. No, I said, but I can stop the losing. Angela gave me a small nod before leading him out. The restaurant had gone silent. People were staring, whispering, trying to piece together what they'd just seen. David didn't look back at anyone but me. As they walked him past the tables, he said softly, "You'll miss me?" I shook my head. "No," I said, more to myself than to him. "I'll remember you. As a lesson." Outside, the flashing lights reflected off the restaurant windows. I could see his reflection in the glass for a moment. Head down, hands cuffed, the predator finally looking small. Angela came back in after giving instructions to her team. She put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's over," she said. I nodded, but my voice barely worked. He really thought he'd never get caught. "They always do," she replied. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The restaurant noise started to return. Clinking glasses, murmured conversations, the hum of music that didn't fit the moment at all. Outside, I could see Ethan standing near the police car watching everything, his face pale with relief. I walked toward the door, my steps heavy but sure. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The same woman who had once been fooled by charm and promises. Only now, her eyes were steady, her shoulders straight. The predator was gone, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like prey. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the Maple County Courthouse, wearing a simple gray dress and holding a folded piece of paper in my hands. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. The seats were filled, some by reporters, some by the women whose names I'd memorized from those case files. Dorothy Chen was there, smaller than I expected, sitting in the front row. Behind her sat Sarah Martinez, clutching a small cross pendant. I had never met them before this day, but we knew each other all the same. David sat at the defense table in a dark suit. He looked thinner, paler, and for the first time smaller. The confidence that used to wrap around him like armor was gone. His hands were cuffed, resting on the table, and when he looked up briefly, his eyes met mine. I didn't flinch. When the judge called my name, I stepped forward and unfolded the paper. My hands were steady now, the same hands that once trembled holding a fake engagement ring. I took a breath and began to read. "Your Honor, I'm not here to ask for pity or punishment. I'm here to tell the truth. We were not foolish. We were lonely. And loneliness is not a crime. This man," I glanced toward David, whose eyes dropped to the table, "preyed on that loneliness. He used kindness like a weapon. He built dreams out of lies. But he didn't destroy us. He just reminded us how strong we can be when we stop being ashamed." The courtroom was quiet. I could hear the sound of the ceiling fan turning above me, the faint shuffle of someone wiping their eyes. I continued, my voice clearer with each word. He thought our age made us easy to manipulate. He thought we'd stay silent because we were embarrassed. But silence is what he counted on. And today, that silence ends. When I finished, I folded the paper again and placed it on the podium. I didn't look back at David this time. I didn't need to. The judge nodded slowly, then read the verdict. "Daniel Reeves, also known as David Langston, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, theft by deception, and elder abuse. Restitution will be paid to your victims through forfeited assets and additional penalties." There was no sound from David, no protest, no sudden outburst. He just sat there, eyes lowered, his jaw tight. For the first time, he didn't have anything to say. Detective Angela Cortez was sitting in the back of the room. As I stepped down from the stand, she caught my eye and gave a small, approving nod. When I walked past her, she leaned in slightly and said under her breath, "He underestimated the wrong woman." I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said quietly. "He did." Outside, the afternoon was warm, the kind of soft light that makes everything look clean after a storm. I walked down the courthouse steps slowly, each one feeling lighter than the last. Ethan was waiting by the car. Melissa stood beside him, holding Chloe's hand. They didn't say anything right away. They didn't have to. The air between us felt full, like we all understood something that didn't need words. I reached into my purse and pulled out the fake ring. It still sparkled in the sunlight, catching and throwing light the way real diamonds do. It was beautiful in a way that made me angry once. Now it just looked harmless, a cheap imitation pretending to be something valuable. I walked toward the small lake behind the courthouse. The water was still mirroring the clouds above it. I held the ring for a moment, rolling it between my fingers, then said softly, "You don't own me anymore." I tossed it into the lake. The splash was small, barely noticeable, but as the ripples spread, the sunlight caught the surface of the water, and for a second it glittered, as if the ring still wanted to be seen. But I knew better. It wasn't the ring that shined. It was me. I turned back toward my family. Ethan smiled through tears, Melissa reached for my hand, and Chloe ran into my arms. The courthouse loomed behind us, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That day wasn't just a verdict. It was an ending and a beginning. The world felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. And as I stood there, the breeze lifting my hair, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. The calm that comes when you finally stop losing. A year after the trial, my life looked nothing like it used to. The quiet of my house no longer felt empty, it felt earned. There were fresh flowers on the table every week, laughter from my grandchildren every Sunday, and something new on the wall above my fireplace, a framed certificate that read Widow's Voice Fund. The idea came to me not long after the sentencing. I kept thinking about those women, Dorothy, Sarah, Linda, and how many others were out there too ashamed to speak, too afraid to admit they'd been fooled. Shame was the last thing any of us needed. What we needed was a voice. So, I used the settlement money and what savings I had left to start a nonprofit, a place for women like us to rebuild. Ethan and Melissa helped me set it up, filling out forms, setting up a small office downtown. We started with a handful of volunteers and one phone line. Within weeks, we were getting calls from across the country. Women who had lost money, homes, dignity, and trust, but still had the strength to reach out. The first meeting we hosted was in the community center. We expected maybe 10 people. Over 40 showed up. Some came alone, some brought daughters or friends. The air was heavy at first, quiet, awkward. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. I remember standing at the front of the room holding my notes and realizing I didn't need them. I said, "We're not here because we're broken. We're here because we survived." That was all it took. One woman stood up, an older lady with shaking hands, and said, "He told me I was the only one who understood him." Then another woman said, "Mine said the same thing." Within minutes, the room was full of voices. Stories poured out like water from a dam. Pain, anger, grief, but also relief. They were finally being heard. At the back of the room, Chloe sat with her camera, recording quietly. She had insisted on filming so other people can hear what Grandma's doing. I let her. She was careful, gentle, capturing faces without intrusion. That night, she uploaded a short clip online, a 2-minute video with the title, "They Took Our Money, But Not Our Voices." By morning, it had thousands of views. By the end of the week, hundreds of thousands. The comments were overwhelming. Messages from women thanking us for giving them courage, from families promising to check in on their mothers, from people simply saying, "You're not alone." The Widow's Voice Fund grew faster than I could have imagined. Donations came in, interviews followed, and soon we had enough funding to expand. But what mattered most wasn't the attention. It was the sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, my pain had become something useful. A few months later, I found myself standing in the garden behind the community center, rows of tulips stretching as far as I could see, a gift from one of our supporters. The petals moved gently in, the breeze, a sea of color under the soft Oregon sunlight. Ethan joined me there after a board meeting, hands in his pockets, smiling the way he used to when he was a boy. "You've done something good here, Mom," he said quietly. I looked at him, then at the flowers. It wasn't just me, it was all of us. He nodded, but his eyes were full of pride. "Still, I'm glad you didn't let him take anything more from you." I smiled. He didn't steal my hope. He just reminded me where to find it. Ethan reached out and pulled me into a hug. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his arms, the solid presence that had once felt so far away when we were on opposite sides of belief and fear. Now, there was only peace between us. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a soft glow over the tulips. The air smelled like spring, fresh, full of promise. Behind us, I heard Chloe laughing, running across the grass with Lucas, her laughter mixing with the rustle of the flowers. Ethan and I turned to watch them, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. There was no need to. That sound, her laughter echoing through the garden, said everything. It was the sound of life continuing. It was the sound of healing. And as the wind carried it through the rows of tulips, I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. The chapter that began in heartbreak had finally turned into something beautiful. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned that even from the darkest soil, something strong can bloom again. And in that garden, surrounded by color and light, I finally felt free. The house was quiet again, but this time it was a peaceful kind of quiet. Late afternoon light spilled through the windows, turning everything golden. Dust floated in the air, moving lazily like it had nowhere to be. I was in my reading room, the same one that had once felt too big for one person. A teapot sat on the table, steam curling into the sunlight. I poured myself a cup, letting the familiar sound of it fill the room. No music, no phone calls, no waiting for someone else to arrive, just me, and the stillness that had finally become a friend instead of an enemy. The bookshelves were lined with old nursing journals, family photos, and small keepsakes from the Widow's Voice Fund. There were letters from women across the country, handwritten notes thanking us, telling us how they had started again. I kept them all. Some days, when the world felt heavy, I reread them to remind myself what healing actually looked like. The camera would have seen me sitting in the armchair near the window, holding the teacup with both hands. My face softer now, the kind of softness that comes after storms have passed. The light hit the silver in my hair. In the background, faint laughter drifted in from the yard, Chloe and Lucas playing with the dog. The sound made me smile. On the small table beside me sat 2 framed photos, one of James and me taken in the garden years ago, and another of Ethan and his family. For a long time, I used to keep them apart. Now they stood side by side, because that was how life should be. The past and the present together, without competition. I looked at the picture of James, tracing the edge of the frame with my fingers. "You'd like the tulips," I said softly. They finally bloomed. The air in the room felt warm, like an invisible hug. Then I looked out the window. The sun was setting slowly, painting the sky in muted shades of pink and orange. It wasn't a grand ending. No big speeches, no crowds, just quiet beauty. The kind you only notice after losing too much noise. If someone were filming, this is where the voiceover would begin. Calm, steady, and real. For years, I thought I was waiting to be chosen again. But I've learned I was never unchosen. I just forgot my worth. The camera would slowly zoom closer, my face thoughtful but content, eyes glistening not from sadness but from peace. I took one last sip of tea, then leaned forward and set the cup down gently. I picked up the picture of my family, placed it next to the frame of James, and straightened both. They belonged together, all of them did. Outside, the laughter continued, higher now, carefree. The wind brushed the curtains lightly, carrying the scent of tulips through the open window. I looked toward the light, my reflection faint in the glass, and smiled. "I am Eleanor Harris," I said quietly. "I am enough."